This is episode 150 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico podcast. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, there is a lot to discuss here in this Thanksgiving week edition of Tipping Point, New Mexico. Happy Thanksgiving to you.
Happy Thanksgiving to you, Paul.
Yeah, so it's we did a Thanksgiving, things we're thankful for in New Mexico policy last year, but we're going to dispense with that because there's actually a lot going on this week in public policy in New Mexico. So we're going to get right down to talking turkey or not talking turkey. We're going to talk economic freedom, and specifically the Fraser Institute's annual study of economic freedom of North America is out and available. You can find that at fraserinstitute.org, F-R-A-S-E-R institute.org, or you can just go to the posting I put up on errorsofenchantment.com. This is really what I look at as the gold standard from state public policy of where you have freedom to do business and spend your money as you want and contract your labor as you want, and where you are restricted by overweening government policies. And give you one guess where New Mexico is. Well, it's not 50th at least, but we are 45th in this particular index. We beat out Oregon, Vermont, Alaska, West Virginia, and New York. So we did better than a handful of states. But you'll notice that none of those states neighbor New Mexico. The neighboring states of New Mexico are among the most economically free. That means your taxes are low, your regulations are low and reasonable, and government spending is not kind of what drives your economy. Arizona is 20th, Utah's 23rd, Colorado is 13th, Oklahoma is 9th, Texas is 5th. So we are just way behind all of our neighbors in terms of economic freedom there, Wally.
Yeah, and I just looking at the map, they break it into quartiles. New Mexico, obviously, in the bottom quartile. We're not in good company with states like California and Oregon in our same color, Minnesota, New York. You know, and these are places that are really struggling, and even more than New Mexico, attributed to maybe poor public policy, lack of economic freedom. And it is not good, because you look to the right, there's Texas, they're one of the best. You look above Colorado, despite being a relatively Democrat-influenced state, policy-wise, still doing better than New Mexico. Interesting point right there as well.
Yeah, we are a bastion of relative economic unfreedom. And the one state that, to me, sticks out as a state that does do pretty well overall, despite their being in that lowest quartile with us, is Minnesota. They just have that darn Norwegian work ethic up there, the Nordic countries, and they don't have a lot of the social challenges that New Mexico faces. They kind of stick out a little bit in their region, whereas North and South Dakota are among the most economically free. Wisconsin is relatively free. Iowa's not so economically free, but New Mexico really does. We're the only other uneconomically free state that kind of just sticks out, because our region, Southwest United States, Texas, of course, leading the way, really is an area where you have so many strong performers in public policies, and New Mexico just doesn't get the job done. And it's one of the reasons why, if you're in California, it's a big state, and you may have to locate in California due to the overwhelming population of that particular state. New Mexico, nobody has to come here unless you're doing, extractive industry. That's why oil and gas can survive, because you can't just extract the oil and gas from wherever you are. You have to go where the oil and gas are. But in New Mexico, we kind of limit ourselves economically to those things that have to be here for some reason or another.
Yeah, and the other thing that struck me is from the quartile perspective is Illinois and Washington, two states that are certainly not considered to be bastions of free market approaches to things, and Illinois in particular suffering tremendously, has a better rating on this study than even New Mexico.
Yeah, well, I don't know the exact reasoning for that, but yeah, Illinois is a state that does have a robust private sector, which tends to, I know, drive these rankings. If you have that successful private sector, even if it's shrinking as a percentage of your overall economy, or even if people are leaving your state, which people are definitely leaving Illinois in greater numbers even than New Mexico by far, you have that situation there. It helps you in this index. Even New Mexico, quite frankly, one of the problems we have is that outside of oil and gas, really the federal government, national labs, military, et cetera, drive our state economy. So we have those factors weigh against us. And I think that's why Alaska as well. Alaska is a state you often see as a very free place, but because of their income tax, which doesn't exist, and their sales tax, which doesn't exist, but they're also a very government-driven state, and that does influence the rankings there.
Yeah, and I was thinking there would be more of a correlation between public land ownership, but if you look at this map of the various, most of the public land is in the western U.S., it is a very mixed bag. So there's states like Colorado, like Montana, like Utah, like Arizona have a lot of public land, maybe not quite as much as New Mexico, all of them. Nevada in the same boat, but that doesn't seem to be a determining factor as well. But I think the fact if you have economic freedom index low and not a lot of privately held land, that could be the double whammy in terms of economic achievement as well. So I don't know. Our friends that we are increasingly starting to compare ourselves to, West Virginia, they're over there. They're in the if this was ELF, they would be on the naughty list as well. So there's
49th.
some. They're definitely right there with us. It's fascinating, and these things also similar studies done on a national basis. The United States used to be the shining beacon of economic freedom on these sort of indexes, and the country as a whole has tended to slip on those in the last many years that I've been following that. So to be the worst of that list when our country as a whole is not necessarily doing as well doesn't bode well. And I think there are great opportunities for our state to do something about most of the things that impact this.
Yeah, and that international index, the Fraser Institute does one of those as well. And actually, this index, they break out the United States, and there's a large audience, a lot of people in the United States, so you can get those rankings for each individual state. But they actually do Canadian provinces if you're interested in what's going on there, and even Mexican states. So you can, or Mexican provinces, I'm not sure which they call them, but you can actually find out what places in Mexico are the more economically free areas and which ones are the ones that struggle or are less economically free. So it's a fascinating report, well worth the read, and we'll probably at some point have Dean Stansel, one of the lead authors on that report, on Tipping Point, New Mexico. We've had him on in the past, and he always does a great job explaining what exactly is happening with that index. But Wally, rarely do we talk about our social media activities here at the Rio Grande Foundation. Just kind of weird to dwell on Twitter and Facebook, and definitely
talk about the selfies we posted at events.
Yes, there is no doubt that the Rio Grande Foundation has a robust social media presence. It's actually my preferred and I found most effective means of attracting reporters' attention, which is really a critical aspect of what we're doing here at the Rio Grande Foundation. But sometimes we interact with elected officials and folks that we might not otherwise get meetings with. And I had a discussion on Twitter with Representative Javier Martinez. Now, he's an Albuquerque area guy. He's one of the furthest left members of the legislature, but I am told he is one of the more intelligent folks on the very far left, which doesn't say a whole lot. But I posted the Twitter exchange at Twitter on our Facebook page. I posted our Twitter exchange on Errors of Enchantment. He was reacting to some data about the lack of preparedness of New Mexico students in K-12. And as is Javier's wont, he immediately, any negative issue with regard to education, talked about tapping the permanent fund to use money to create a new pre-K program and early childhood programs, et cetera, et cetera. So I, in response to him, and we've had this out in the past, I said, and I quote, and he had said it was tragic, these results. And I said, if you think it is so tragic, I agree that it is, parentheses, then you, quote, and other Democrats in the legislature should push for dramatic expansion of parental choice, tax credits, vouchers, and charters. The unions want none of that, capitalized all, none of that. So far at NM Dems, New Mexico Democrats have sided with unions. And the response, the august, informed response from our elected officials, okay, boomer.
Oh, okay, boomer. The insult, the new insult of 2019. That's funny. You're not a boomer. I think you're younger than a boomer.
I'm firmly in Generation X. I love my Nirvana, my Seattle Sound, and I did not read the Guide to the Galaxy, whatever that guy's book was. It was supposed to be the Generation X book that everybody read. It was Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Supposedly that was the Generation X tome, the defining book of our generation. But the whole boomer thing, and mostly I'm concerned about the fact that he avoided a very important policy discussion while just taking his views and really his overwhelming support for the educational bureaucracy and the unions, and not getting into the nitty-gritty of would school choice actually help New Mexico children? Would empowering parents to take their kids out of schools that are not fitting their children's best interests, whether that's from a quality perspective or what they're teaching perspective and how they teach it, and giving those parents opportunities? None of those discussions were had. It was just, okay, boomer.
All right, there you go. Well, as we record this podcast, not coincidentally, I went and got the teacup that has the insults from the Bard, the Shakespearean, all of his plays and the things he wrote.
I don't think he put boomer in.
He didn't put okay, boomer. The closest what I would have said to you if I really wanted to be offensive to you, Paul, is I would have called you, as the Bard did, the anointed sovereign of sighs and groans. So he obviously did not want to continue the conversation. And on your post at Airs, did he re-engage at any point, or was that the end of it?
He claims in a subsequent Twitter post that I believe the quote was, if vouchers were proven to have, all these impacts, then I would be more than willing to sponsor them. And so I don't use the term vouchers. Vouchers I don't think are really constitutional under New Mexico's anti-donation clause. What we've worked on is tax credits, which essentially allow money that would otherwise be taxed away, so it gets it before the tax man takes it, that you could make donations to 501c3 organizations. These have been proven to be constitutional in other states. So these C3 organizations would then create scholarships targeted at low-income and needy children. The concept was back in 2011 and I think even 2012 was endorsed by folks like Mo Maestas, Representative Mo Maestas, Senator Jerry Ortiz y Pino, former Representative Ray Begay, another Democrat. They're all Democrats, and Senator Pete Campos. There were two different proposals, one for normal, average students, one for special needs students. So there were two different bills introduced back in 2011. And I sent him the actual legislation and said, and I tagged in, of course, Antonio Mo Maestas on Twitter. He's very active on Twitter, and said, hey, maybe you could use a bill that Representative Maestas used in previous years. Now, Representative Maestas has been on this show. He's somebody that is my state representative where I live on the west side of Albuquerque. We have a good relationship. He's a friendly guy, even if we disagree strongly on many, many public policy issues. What Representative Maestas did is he introduced these bills and then very quickly heard it from the rank and file Democrats and the unions who strongly support the Democratic Party that this was not cool to them, that they should not, their representatives, the Democrats, should not be sponsoring choice options, especially those that go outside of the traditional public system. And he has not sponsored a bill in the last 7 years dealing with school choice. So the fact is that Javier Martinez is not only a jerk, but he claims to care about improving the lot of New Mexico's students, but he only will do so in ways that he believes will be effective, even if the data actually show that pre-K is not necessarily the best system. He's just locked into that particular issue.
Yes, and this is such an important issue. We talk about it quite often. There's always educational policies. It's one of the things that is one of the biggest issues for the success of New Mexico as a state. The people of New Mexico, the students in New Mexico getting a high-quality education, educational achievement. Such an important thing. There will be more on this issues, but it seemed like this one came, this debate, this free exchange ideas crashed into the bar ditch and the car rolled over. So we'll have to try it another time.
Yeah, well, the Democrats do have control over Santa Fe. There was a push during the Martinez administration. I believe it passed the House when the Republicans had control. Martinez and her people took control, if you will, of the idea at the time. And while we generally had a lot of good things to say about Governor Martinez, we were not always fans of her education approach, not necessarily the policies that she actually enacted, but the approach, I think, left a lot to be desired from a political and a research, what is actually going to affect students' outcomes perspective. But they did pass the bill in 2015 out of the House, only to see it die in the Democrat-controlled Senate. So we have a very long track record of Democrats in New Mexico opposing school choice. Of course, they've also had bills introduced to put moratoriums on charter schools. I think charter schools are safe at this point, especially given the new PED secretary, Stewart, who I think while he may not be where we want him on choice, it was an indicator in his nomination that he was not going to backtrack on charter schools. And I hope that is the case. And he spoke recently at a charter school and said, he wants to leverage them as experimental options and reform ideas and helping those crop up. So kudos to him for that, by the way.
Yeah, and then the thing that is interesting when you try to change huge systems with one systematic fell swoop, whether it be healthcare and what happens on the national level, or you make these grandiose changes in education policy. If they work, it's fantastic. If they don't, you've wasted so much time, so much money, so much momentum, and your opportunity cost because people just grow tired of it. One of the things that the charter schools, the school choice approach has is some ways to incubate things that maybe do work and that could then be brought larger within the system like New Mexico. That's for no other reason. I think that is a good reason to support it. because these are more nimble and hopefully in many cases, I won't say they're all that way, more flexible entities that can try things, but you don't have to try it out on the entire system, not knowing if it's going to work on a lot of these things. So
yeah, one of the hallmarks of successful groups, economic areas, is that you don't have one centralized bureaucracy with the government paying for it through the tax code and taxes being used by one bureaucracy. You have more options. You have preferably that individual relationship between the customer and the service provider. Those kinds of things would improve the situation. Now, we're not in a position at this point in New Mexico or anywhere else to really get rid of that taxpayer financed aspect, but anytime you can take a step forward towards more diversity of options, more direct relationship between the service providers and the people who are consuming the service and purchasing the service, or whatever it is, you are doing yourself a favor. One size fits all, monopolistic government bureaucracies are the very worst way to organize any system in society. So one of the issues that we talked about recently was the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights in Colorado and the success in defeating a raid on Taxpayers' Bill of Rights up in Colorado on Election Day. The voters in a bluish state overwhelmingly rejected plans to take away their refunds, 56 to 44%. So 56% said, heck no, we want to keep those refunds coming, even though they vote for liberal politicians, just like they vote for here. But we noted at the time that Coloradans make a mind-boggling $17,000 per year more than the average New Mexican on average. $17,000 annually per year in Colorado. That is phenomenal, and that's one of the reasons, quite frankly, we're losing our young people to places like Colorado. I realize marijuana and cannabis are part of that equation, but if you can't find a job, you can't do all that other fun stuff, so to speak. And $17,000 a year is a lot of money for the average. Anyway, we thought, gee, if New Mexico had a Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, where would we be in terms of potentially providing refunds to New Mexicans? Now, Tabor in Colorado is a much more robust thing. There's local requirements that they not spend too much money. There's the right to vote on all tax increases. But if we just took the state of New Mexico, which when Martinez left office, the budget was $6.3 billion in the general fund. We're expecting, I believe, $8 billion this year based on oil and gas revenues. That's $1.7 billion in 2 years, 27% increase. But inflation and population growth have increased a combined just over 3% during that time frame. And I'm being pretty generous on that because CPI and population, CPI hasn't gone up very much, but we gave them the gentleman's curve because we knew that these numbers were going to be quite stark. Every man, woman, and child, if we got Taxpayer Bill of Rights refunds a la Colorado, every man, woman, and child, $786.49. That would be the refund over the last 2 years. My family has 5 members in it. We're talking close to $4,000 that could have been given back to the guessing household. Instead, it's going to be spent by bureaucrats in Santa Fe and largely wasted. That's a lot of money, Wally. It would be nice to see that kind of money. And there's other ways we could distribute that. Is doing man and woman and child, every person in the state, the fairest way to do it, or tax filers could really cash in if we gave each individual who files their taxes. But the point is that Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, that is where you get that bang for the buck when you are returning money to the taxpayers instead of feeding the bureaucrats in Santa Fe. That's why Colorado is where it is and we're where we are.
Yes, and not everyone is happy about Colorado where it is. There's the forces of big government in Colorado were the ones that put this initiative out there to try to get rid of it. And I found it interesting. Let me put it that way. At a minimum, interesting that 44% of the people said, no, I don't want control over whether my taxes go up or down. And I was just thinking, that's a huge, important part of living and working and consuming and spending and what we do in our economy. What else would that group want the government to do for them? Decide what kind of car you should buy, what clothes you should wear, what food you should eat, whether you should have a large, medium, or small soft drink. There's a whole lot of things. And it is interesting to me that 44% of the people said, no, we think it's a good idea to take this power away from the voting populace and put something in that lets the elected bureaucrats that sometimes go a long time in between elections with a lot of things done in ways that aren't necessarily tied to them. So,
well, Wally, it's one of the reasons democracy is awful, and the founding fathers rightfully hated the idea of democracy.
Yep.
Because that 44%, just, you add enough people to put them over the top to 51%. In a righteous world, in a fair world, they would have a line on their tax form that would say, here's what the government requires under the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, inflation and population growth. Here's what your refund could be. Will you accept this money back?
Right.
Or will you donate it, quote unquote, to the treasury of the state of Colorado? Now, that would be a good system, because then those of us who don't trust government much, at least with the money, we can debate whether inflation and population growth and everything that Colorado government or New Mexico government would do with that money is fair or valid. But at least that gives them the money that they, quote unquote, need to continue. Theoretically, they should be getting more efficient as technology develops and as people are better trained and industry gets more developed. But that's a whole separate issue. Let's just talk about why should a bare majority, determine how the rest of us, whether they keep that money or whether that money goes back to the treasury. But anyway, I will not bash democracy any further on this particular show. Yes, the first clue that democracy dollars was a dumb idea was they put democracy in the title.
Yeah, and Paul, to be clear, you are not a advocate of totalitarianism.
No.
You are more for the representative form, the Republican
constitutional republic.
Yes, form of government.
Where they actually obey the rules in a constitutional republic. No, but democracy as a majoritarian enterprise is just not. It requires a hyper-educated, very well-informed group of voters. And yes, in that case, democracy actually worked out, as it did in the democracy dollars issue. But democracy is a very unfortunate way to do things. It's like if the Drangmeisters took me out to dinner and I said, who's paying the bill tonight? And you guys said, sure. And I said, well, I was going to get the spaghetti, but now I'm getting that filet. It's a very unfair way to do things. And I'm not saying governance is easy, but certainly a constitutional republic is the way to go, and democracy has many, many different flaws in it. But
and not to throw you under the bus, but when I was hearing you talk, it's almost like, there's the old Karl Marx slogan, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. You're just taking and turning that on its head, so that the according to his needs is the government. And if you say, if you have the ability to put more money in for the government on your tax return, so be it. And did you know there's a form when a long time ago as a tax accountant, if you want to give money to the federal government, donate money, they will take it in any and all amounts. So
and they should.
It is still an option out there. You don't need the middleman. You don't need a law to make you do it if you're so inclined.
If folks want to give more money to Washington or Santa Fe or the city of Albuquerque or whatever city in New Mexico, county government, please do go knock yourself out and give that money to them. But secretly, deep in their heart of hearts, even the most left-wing progressive does not do that very often. There might be a couple. I think they have that. They have an analysis of the federal how many people take advantage of that, and it's like a dozen every year or something.
It is not very many.
No. Well, because they know that ultimately they can use their money more effectively. Anyway, well, we're going to talk about hazardous waste next. And
everyone's favorite topic.
Apropos of nothing except for, maybe the ability to end Tabor would have been equivalent to hazardous waste. But it's just another tax grab. And that's really what it boils down to. You can like it, you can not like it, but our modern society does produce a certain amount of hazardous waste. It's, by all accounts, as I see it, disposed of in very regulated and very safe ways. You occasionally get something, but that is generally from very long ago situations where people didn't have the knowledge, or perhaps there were no regulations in place. And we're not saying that regulations on hazardous waste are a bad idea. What we are saying is that the state of New Mexico is now considering raising fees, not to improve the environment or anything, but just to get more money, from 100% to over 16,600% over the previous existing fee structure. Now, folks who produce this waste, and it's small businesses, it's large business, it's whoever, they already have to comply with the law. They have to pay for the disposal, and it's not disposed of here. There are more than 3,000 companies in New Mexico that generate such waste as a result of normal business operation. And, it's just another way that the government is trying to nickel and dime us here in New Mexico. So 100%, which is a doubling, to 16,600%, and I am at a loss to tell you how much that is over an existing amount aside from the percentage. So it's and the nice thing here is that you can, folks, read up, look at this information, and go submit public comment. I think the comment period is good through the early-ish part of December. So take some time out of your Thanksgiving holiday weekend and provide a comment. This is at the Environmental Improvement Board. Maybe we'll get some pushback against the government just taking more money out of New Mexico businesses' pockets in this case.
Yes, and it is. This is a trend that has been going on a long time. Tax increases are easy to fight head on in the political system, but not reasonable fees like this. And reasonable, I put quote unquote. I have no idea if these are fees are reasonable. I would suspect they're not. And they're not saying that this is needed to do this, that, or the other. It's just that, hey, we'd like more money. And why should we have to go to the legislature? If you just give us the power as this bureaucratic entity, we'll go take the money that we need from the folks that we regulate.
And speaking of fees and taxes, there will be a push again in the next legislative session for a gas tax increase. And we already had significant tax increases in 2019. Will we see a significant push? I sincerely hope not, but there was an article written in the Albuquerque Journal in which somebody made the not so compelling case for a higher gas tax. We laid out specific reasons why not to. Yes, we do have infrastructure needs in the state, but we're wasting $30 million a year on the rail runner. That's just operating costs. That's one thing that could be gotten rid of. Of course, it's, the progressives will always point out when there's a regressive policy, a regressive tax cut or something, but gas taxes are a regressive tax in more than one way. They're obviously charged at one rate, but who drives the old beaters, the old cars that don't get such good mileage? It's the low-income folks. And so there's a number of reasons why we should not raise the gas tax. I hope this is a dead letter in Santa Fe, but we needed to point this one out, especially since the Albuquerque Journal ran a piece making the point that we should have a higher gas tax.
Yeah, and the gas tax is the primary funding source for road repair, maintenance, and construction in federally and state. But it is a little known fact that the legislature, sitting on their oodles of cash, can allocate additional funds to the roads. If there's a short-term need, they certainly have the ability to do that. Again, we've talked about a lot of uses for the $1 billion that expected to come this coming year. You know, we had a record amount flowing into the government of state of New Mexico this last year, and they raised taxes in a way. This is something you need to keep an eye on, because there is a seemingly endless appetite for more spending. And I guess the only other things that are more of a generic is in taxation. Number one, for the children. Often it is not. If you hear for the children, it is often not. I'm not saying it never is. Number two is for the roads, and number three is for the infrastructure. And those are the three things that, this is for infrastructure, this is for roads. Of course we have to do it. But as you say, there's a lot of things go into the transportation budget that could be potentially redirected if we need more road spending.
Yeah, there is a need for roads in southeast New Mexico, but there is also plenty of money available coming out of the same place that they need the infrastructure. They are connected, and there should be an effort to place some more money back into southeastern New Mexico by the legislature to address the road issues. Of course, they should also deal with the rail runner, as I said, Davis-Bacon laws that increase the price of construction on public works projects, including schools and roads as well. There are many different ways to make sure that we have enough infrastructure in our state. And by infrastructure, that does mean roads in New Mexico, not the rail runner. And certainly mass transit projects or transit projects in the oil patch will definitely not work. Thankfully, I haven't heard any of those idiotic ideas.
The oil runner.
The oil runner, yes. It'll be an electric train, I'm sure.
Well, Paul, all of this discussion of public policies make me want to go wet my whistle at a local drinking establishment. What if a TV were to be on in one of these said establishments? Any change on that front?
So the policy is bad enough. So this is City of Albuquerque. Just this week, the council adopted a new mandate and fee structure. There's no grace period or no one violation, 3 strikes, you're out kind of deal. Seems like you can get pegged for one violation of this particular law, which is a new $250 or for multiple violations, $500 fine on restaurants and other businesses that might have TVs on in the front lobby or whatever, doctor's offices, and they must have closed captioning on their televisions. And it's not just any closed captioning. There's actually a guideline of what type of closed captioning is included. Now, that's bad.
Oh, that's bad because not all TVs have the latest closed captioning technology. So, you might have a small eatery that has a TV, and they might have to get a new TV to have the TV on and not face a $250 or $500 fine.
Yeah. So this is definitely, I think, all but the most hardcore leftists can say it is government overreach. It is unnecessarily aggressive of a mandate. The problem is in Albuquerque, and this is still blowback from the Berry administration, where a Republican, his main legacy is to expand governments, to drive a transportation network, a system down central, destroying arguably the main corridor through Albuquerque, certainly one of the most famous roads in America, Route 66. That passed for Republican policy, and Republicans, except for Dan Lewis, who thankfully opposed that, did. But now we have Republicans jumping on board with this closed caption mandate. And I point to Brad Winter, who's a good guy, and Trudy Jones, who just got reelected, while Don Harris was absent from the vote and excused. So Winter and Jones supported, along with Pat Davis and Isaac Benton and all the progressives on.
So those who were there, it was unanimous, basically.
Exactly.
Is that right?
Yeah, not a single member of the city council stuck their necks out and opposed this new mandate. Now, you know the Restaurant Association, and did this sneak up on them? Were they aware of this issue?
Not to my knowledge. I cannot speak for the leader of that august organization.
That is okay.
But not to the best of my knowledge.
So there was no grassroots opposition to this. But to be fair, we're talking a week before Thanksgiving, an issue that to their credit, Channel 13, KRQE, did a fair amount of coverage of this particular issue. But I don't think I saw a single article in the Albuquerque Journal before this policy was enacted. And quite frankly, that's where I get a majority of my news, is from the Journal. And you expect the papers to do a better job than the television stations. And look, it is sad and unfortunate that these people who claim out one side of their mouth that we want business to locate here, we want small business, we advocate for these people, and then to, without a fight, impose these unnecessary fees. And one business owner said, look, I have never had a single person come to me and ask for closed captioning to be put up on the televisions. And the question I have, so they say if you have, say, multiple TVs on one game, for example, one football game or something, only one TV has to have the closed captioning. But what you get is like the Buffalo Wings places or the sports bars, they have the Sunday ticket for NFL games. You have 10 or 12 football games on at once. You have to make sure that closed captioning is on each and every one of those televisions, or you could get a serious dose of fines.
Well, and that is one of the main, not the only, but that is one of the big consumers of television in a restaurant type setting is sports. And a lot of times in these sports bars, you don't want closed captioning on, whether you have problems with hearing or not, because the closed captioning takes away, this is a sporting event. It's football. It already has the score. It has, it's 2nd and 4 to go. You know all these things. You don't necessarily want the screen taken up with closed captioning. And again, that's whether you are hard of hearing or not. And so they have just made the sports bar world a whole lot more difficult.
Yeah, and maybe Mayor Keller will see fit to veto this ill-advised legislation. It's still not been made into law formally, despite a unanimous council vote. And we could dream that the mayor would oppose this kind of thing. Because, as a consumer of more than my share of sports television, you go to a crowded sports bar. If you're lucky, you have one audio feed coming from one of the TVs. The marquee game will have the audio.
Right.
But you can't have competing television audio in a confined space. You have people making noise, talking. You have the TV game or games. And you're right. Half the TVs, 3/4 of the TVs virtually in these places, or all but one, are of different games that are silent. And the average person is looking at the screen to see the game that they're watching. Now they're going to be forced to see these block letters appearing in significant quantity on the TV screen. It's not that you could actually hear the game anyway. You're just limited now by what you can see thanks to this ridiculous new law. So might have to have a conversation with our folks at the Restaurant Association, see if we can push for the mayor to veto this thing. Mayor Keller is, I believe he played football at Pius High School, went to Notre Dame. He seems to be kind of a jock. Maybe Mayor Keller can do us all a favor, and then we can convince some of these seemingly so ill-informed city councilors to take a different approach here.
Yes, absolutely. I do think this is This is a solution looking for a problem. Closed captioning is a wonderful thing in the right place. Really, is this what we want to do in Albuquerque? Is this really something? Who is the constituency for this? Who brought this idea up?
Yeah.
Please veto. I'm with you. That would be a fantastic veto. Send that baby back to the drawing board.
All right. Thanks for listening to this week's podcast. Make sure to get the latest edition of Tipping Point New Mexico by subscribing at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. You can post or comment on this and other episodes on Facebook and Twitter, and tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.